Okay, this week is Parshas Emor, and there are so many things in this week's Torah portion that you can speak about. It starts off saying, say to the Kohanim, and all the different laws about what Kohanim are allowed to do, not allowed to do, who they're allowed to bury, how they're not allowed to become tamei mates, which means impure, spiritually impure, from touching a dead body. Then it goes into a lot of the holidays, a lot of really, really interesting things. And I didn't choose to talk about any of those. At the end of the week's Torah portion, the very, very end, there's a little story there. And the story goes that this woman, who's called an Isha Yisraelit, a Jewish woman, and it says her name is Shlomit bas Divri. And it says she had a son, and her son was this child of an Egyptian, and he went out into the camp, and he got into some kind of fight with another person who was a Ben Israeli, another Jewish person, and they got into this argument or some kind of fight, and during that time he cursed with God's very, very holy name. The holy name, nowadays we don't even have these holy names. This is the holy name that was used only in the temple. We've forgotten how to say it. It had tremendous power. It was also the holiest name of God. So we don't even, it's the Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey, the holiest name of God. He swore with this name of God and cursed with this name of God. And the nation did not know what to do with him. So they brought him in front of Moshe, who also asked God, and God said that the person needs to be stoned and put to death for swearing with for profaning God's name in that way. So it was just a very interesting episode, and I was very curious to understand more about this episode. Why is this woman mentioned? Why is Shlomit bas Divri mentioned? Who was the father of this boy, that he was an Egyptian? How did that happen? What exactly was happening in this whole episode? And is there any connection of that to where it's placed? Because the whole parsha is about different laws that are happening. Laws of Kohanim, talks about Shabbat, keeping the holidays, Moed, Mikra'e, callings of holiness, Mikra'e Kodesh. These are different callings of holiness and how they come around every year. Like a lot of different things were said in this week's Torah portion, but it's all about laws. And then all of a sudden it switches to this narrative about this woman who had the son who cursed and used the name of God. And it just piqued my curiosity to try to understand more about what was happening here and who exactly this was. So I did a little detective work, okay? And we looked into some of the midrashim, which are the commentaries on the Torah, because the Torah doesn't always say everything that there is to say. There's obviously an oral tradition that comes with the Torah. And we know this because the Torah says, put boxes on your head, put totafot beineinecha, put these boxes on your head. What are these totafot? And we know from the oral tradition, these are the tefillin, and what the tefillin have inside of them, and how the tefillin have the different parshiot that we write from the Torah on them. So Torah is always accompanied with the oral tradition, the oral traditions that came along with it. Sometimes the oral traditions are in contradiction with one another, but very often they are not, and I wanted to understand more about this story. And so looking into the story, we found something very fascinating that I want to share with you. So who was this Jewish woman? It says this Jewish woman was Shlomit bas Divri. And Rashi right away on this pasuk, on this verse, tells us, why was she called Shlomit bas Divri? She was called this because the word Shlomit has in it
Shalom.
Shalom. She used to ask people, Shalom Alecha, how are you? How are you? How are you? But not in a way, I mean, we know that speech is something that's been given to us, and it says that women in particular have been given extra speech. We've been given extra measures of speech because we can use speech in very positive ways. You can use speech to encourage people. You can use speech to teach people. You can use speech to give therapy to people. These are all, you can use speech as a listening ear to talk and empathize with someone. These are all positive ways that we use speech. But then there's also negative speech that's just used for the sake of speaking, that has no purpose, for just rattling and tattling and hearing and just telling one person what this one says and one person what that one says. And Rashi tells us that this woman's Shalom Alecha was always not about just making people feel comfortable. How are you? How are you doing? How was your day? But in order to talk and to tell to the next person. And that's why it says Bas Divri, from the word Dibor, which means, or Davar, which means to speak. Daber, speak.
What's his name?
But Shlomit, Bat Divri, which means Lidaber.
Lidaber.
Right? So she was talking. She would always be talking and talking and talking. And this is significant because, according to some commentaries, she was inappropriate in her talking. She would talk too much. Not only would she talk too much, but she would talk in a way that was negative, bringing one person's speech to another. And she would also talk in a way that was not modest, that was not appropriate or modest. And this was important to know because this is what created a situation for her that was a very unfortunate situation. What was the situation, and how was her son the son of a Mitzri, of an Egyptian? What happened? So the commentaries, the Midrash says that what happened was every person in the Jewish nation, when the Jewish people were in Egypt, there was different taskmasters. And every taskmaster was an Egyptian taskmaster, and he had underneath him 10 different officers, or shotrim, 10 different officers from the Jewish people. So there was this Egyptian who was the overlord over 10 different officers who were Jewish, and each of those officers was in charge of 10 Jewish slaves. So being an officer was not a very positive position because they had to beat the Jews and make them do what they wanted to, what was necessary for them to do. So it was not really a very respectable position. Someone who was a more respectable person would not want to take that position and harm his fellow Jews. And the taskmaster was the Egyptian who was on top of them. So the taskmaster was really on top of 100 people, right? Because he had 10 different officers underneath him, and each of those had 10 different people underneath him. So he was on top of really 100 Jews. Now, in the mornings, the taskmasters would go from home to home in the Jewish quarter, or where the Jews were, to wake up the men very early and make sure these officers went out to get their own people, the people that were underneath them, and make sure that they were working hard. So this taskmaster went into one Jewish home, and the home was Shlomit's. And Shlomit smiled at him or greeted him in a very inappropriate way, according to the one Midrash. And when he saw that, he said, "Oh, she's pretty, and she's being a little flirtatious. I'm going to have her." So what happened was, when he came in to wake up the husband the following day, it says he woke up the husband, and the husband left, and then he came back in, and he was intimate with Shlomit.
Oh, wow.
According to some, Shlomit did not know about it, and she thought it was her husband returning. She thought her husband had just left, and he returned. She thought he didn't leave, and she thought she was being intimate with her husband. According to others, she was agreeable to it. So that part we don't know. But let's say she wasn't agreeable to it. She just thought it was her husband. Her husband then, at the end of the day, somehow returned to, and saw that the taskmaster was leaving the home. So he kind of suspected that something was going on. He came in and said to his wife, "Was the Egyptian just here?" And she admitted that, "I was intimate with him. I thought it was you." He then divorced his wife because she had intimate relations with this Egyptian. Now, the taskmaster knew that he met the husband as he was leaving. So he understood that the husband would understand what he had just done with his wife. And therefore, when he saw this Egyptian later on in the day working, he made sure to beat him very hard, and work him very hard. And he beat him so much because he was trying to kill him, because he didn't want him to know what he had done. I told you this was interesting, right?
Yes.
Now, what happened next was we learned in previous parshiot that Moshe was taken as a little boy. He was saved by Batya, right? And he was then left with his mother to nurse him until he was old enough to be brought to the palace. And then he was brought up by Batya, the daughter of King Paro. And he was brought up as a prince. And it says one day Moshe went out of the castle, and he sees that there's an Egyptian hitting this Jew. And he sees the Egyptian hitting this Jew, and he sees in his prophetic vision what had happened. And what did he see had happened? He realized that this Egyptian was hitting this Jew because he had just defiled this man's wife. And now, not only did he defile the man's wife, now he's actually beating the husband because of it. So it says Moshe went and he killed the Egyptian by using the name of God. And the Egyptian died, and the Jew was saved. We then hear that another episode with Moshe that the commentaries, the Midrash also writes about, says that the next day Moshe goes out and he now sees two Jews fighting. Now it's two Jewish people fighting. And one raises his hand to strike the other, and he says, "Why are you hitting your brother? How dare you hit your brother?" And the man says, "Oh, are you now going to be a lord over me? Are you going to be a prince over me? Are you going to do to me just what you did yesterday to the Egypt or the other day to the Egyptian? You're going to kill me," right? We know that this is what happened here. You're going to kill me just like you killed the Egyptian. And it says, "Achei nodah hadavar." Moshe says, now the thing is no. Now I understand either why the Jews are in Egypt, because you have people who are doing this, or because this guy is going to go and tell on me. And that was when Moshe actually had to run away from Paro's palace, and he ran away to Midian for the next many years until he was called back by God to come and redeem the Jewish people. Now the commentaries tell us, who was this man the second day? How did the man the second day know what had happened the day before that the Egyptian was killed by Moshe? And the commentaries explain this man who said this the following day, who raised his hand to hit his friend, was actually the same man who the previous day was saved by Moshe, who the Egyptian was trying to kill, and Moshe killed the Egyptians instead, and he saw what happened to the Egyptian, that the Egyptian was killed. Now, rather than feeling gratitude to Moshe for saving him, because that's what Moshe did, he saved him from the Egyptian, this man instead now took it out on Moshe and says, "Oh, are you going to do to me exactly what you did to the Egyptian?" And the commentaries also tell us who was this man who was doing this. And it says this was none other than Datan. And we know who is Datan. We hear of him a lot once the Jewish people are out in the desert. How do we hear of him? He's the one that he was the one that was involved in all the problems, all the complaining, all the problems. He was the head of that league. It says when it was time to take the man, and they were told, use up the man, only take for that day, and whatever's left, whatever you don't eat on that day is going to spoil for the next day. Just take day by day, and in this way you strengthen your faith in God, because every day I have to rely on God to provide for me. And that was the whole point of the Amman, which is emunah, to give us that faith in God. What did Datan do? He made sure to take extra and leave it over for the next day, and tried to say, oh, it's not, it hasn't ruined. It did ruin it. It got ruined. But he was always trying to provoke, always trying to do in a negative way. The entire time that the Jewish people were in the desert, all the complaining, it was always Datan. Datan and Aviram were there, and Datan and Aviram were actually these two Jews who were fighting with each other. Now, if we know that it was Datan who was the one who was there the second day and said to Moshe, "Are you going to kill me just like you killed the Egyptian?" then we know he was the one that was there the previous day who the Egyptian tried to kill. Now, why did the Egyptian try to kill him? Because he was the one who was the husband of Shlomit bas Divri. So we now know that Shlomit was married to Dasan. And the child that was born was, the father was the Egyptian taskmaster and Shlomit. Dasan then divorced his wife and he married another woman. And the person who, the argument that was going on in right now in this week's Torah portion was this child of Shlomit, who was born to the Egyptian taskmaster, was fighting with Dasan's son, who was born to his new wife. The two of them were fighting with each other, and Dasan's son was accusing Shlomit's son, or saying something derogatory about his mother. And that was when he got very upset, because at that point, Shlomit's son was trying to, he said, I am from the Shevet of Dan, because my mother is from Dan, from that tribe. And so he wanted to pitch his tent by the Shevet of Dan. But when it comes to Judaism, in Judaism, the essence of the person, if we are Jewish or not, goes after our mother. That's our essence. That's who we are. The tribal position of the person, which means the different functions that you have. There's essence and there's function. There's being and there's doing. The woman is being. We are the essence. We are who you are. We are, the essence of your soul is through the woman. What you do and how you do it, the various functions, goes through the more ceremonial positions, goes through the father. That's the tribe. That's why if a person is a Kohen, Levi, or Yisrael, it's according to the father. If a person is whatever Shevet, whatever tribe you're from, if you're from Yehuda, or from Yosef, or from whichever one, that goes according to the father. So when Shlomit's son said, I want to pitch my tent by the tribe of Dan, they said, no, you can't, because this goes according to the father, not your mother. And his father was an Egyptian. And that was when he got upset, and that's when his step, I guess, what would be the relationship of Dasan's new son to his
Stepbrother.
whatever it is. Right.
Complicated.
That's when he got into this altercation with him, and he apparently insulted his mother, and that was when he cursed with the name of God. Now, it's interesting to note that according to some, according to all, we see that the only situation when the Jewish people were in Egypt, there was only one situation where a woman was unfaithful to her husband, where she was intimate with an Egyptian. And even that situation was not really her fault. I mean, it kind of happened, partially her fault. Maybe her behavior contributed to it, definitely contributed to it, but it wasn't like it was only one situation. All the Jewish people, the men and the women, both of them, did not have any kind of relations with the Egyptian. And it's a little unusual because when you're in a slave situation, it's very common for the slave to try to get favors from the oppressor. I mean, in a way, we wouldn't even consider this a mutual relationship, because it's almost like you're trying to get the favors and you're trying to get on the good side of the other guy, because maybe then in some way you'll benefit. You know, after all, you're a slave, you're powerless, you have no agency over yourself. And yet, even in such a situation, it says there was no mixing between the Egyptians and the Jewish people, except this was the one situation. And as the Rebbe says, this one situation shows the virtue of all the Jewish people, of all the Jewish women, that none of them, not one of them was like that. According to one commentary, it says that when the Jewish people went to Mara, which it says was bitter, that was when the Jewish people were complaining that they didn't have water. And God said, hit the rock, hit the rock, and then the water will come. It says that there, the word Mara means bitter. And there's another time when we have bitter waters. Anyone know another time when we have bitter waters that are used? And the name of God is actually put into the bitter waters? Isha Sota, which is the woman who was unfaithful to her husband, or she suspected of being unfaithful to her husband. And God wants peace between husband and wife. If a woman is suspected of being unfaithful to her husband and she still wants to remain in the marriage and he still wants to remain in the marriage, what happens is there's a procedure that's done. She's brought before the Kohen, and they take water and mix it with some earth from the floor, and God's holy name is put into it and erased in the mixture, and then the woman drinks the mixture, and if she really was unfaithful, it says her stomach blows up, and at the same time the lover who she had relations with, the same thing happens to him, and she dies. If she's innocent, though, and she was not unfaithful to her husband, it says she's given a lot of blessings, and if she didn't have children, she gets children. If she had hard, difficulty pregnancies, she's given many, many blessings. That's a whole different topic that we can talk about, and I think we have spoken about it a couple of times. But this is the story of the Isha Sota, and the bitter waters are taken out then. So there are commentaries who say that at Mara, at this place where they were complaining about the water and God miraculously provided water, this water was like the water for the Isha Sota, that miraculously it had a power to actually see was anyone unfaithful or not. And what happened was, had there been any people, any wives or any husbands who suspected their spouse had possibly been unfaithful because they were in such a difficult situation where they might have tried to get into the favor of this ruling class, the Mara waters cleared the doubt, because anyone who was unfaithful would have died, and not one single person died in that situation, not men and not women. And that showed the wives and the husbands that they were completely faithful. And the question is, what about the Shlomit? She was unfaithful at the time. So it says she did not have the bitter waters because at that point she was already divorced from her husband, from Dasan, right? He was divorced and he had remarried somebody else. So there was no reason for her to take these bitter waters. So getting back to the story, it says, where did Shlomit's son learn to say this holy name of God? Where did he know this holy name of God, and why did he use it in such a negative way? It says, where did he hear this name? He heard it at Mount Sinai. When God said at Mount Sinai, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am God your God. And he heard God saying this holiest name of God at that point. And what's fascinating about this is that we see, how did he use the name of God? He had such a beautiful spiritual experience where God descended on the mountain. The holiest experience that the Jewish people had. It says that their souls departed even because it was such a holy, awesome experience with the lightning and the thunder and everything, and God actually communicating with them. And he's hearing this spectacular experience with God revealing himself, the most spiritual experience. And how is he taking it in instead of using it and seeing this as something so beautiful and so awesome and so spiritual? Instead, he's using that same name that he heard then to curse God. And it just shows us that we can sometimes be in a situation where we can have the most awesome thing, and what is it saying? You miss the trees for the forest. You miss the forest for the trees. You don't see beyond what is there. So you're seeing such an awesome experience, but you're not using it in a positive way. And that's unfortunate. What we can learn from this is sometimes you see a situation, and rather than see it in a positive way, you see it in a negative way. As well. And this is what I was also wondering, what is this connection between the beginning of this week's Torah portion and here, and all the laws and here? So if we look at the very beginning of the Torah portion, it talks about Emor, it's called Emor, the parshat of Emor, speak, because it's telling, Emor al ha-kohanim, say to the Kohanim, Va'amarta, and they should say, the elderly Kohanim should teach and say to the younger Kohanim. And what should they say? All these laws about holiness, all these laws about purity, all these various laws. The elders should teach the younger. And as Rashi explains on that pasuk, lahazhir gedolim al haktanim, to warn or to enjoin the elders regarding the young ones. That's why it says Emor twice. Say and say. You should say to them, and they should say to those underneath them. They should educate them. And from here we learn, the Rebbe says lahazhir could mean to warn or to enjoin, to teach them to do this, but it can also mean zohar, to shine brightly. And the whole point of how we teach something is teach it. When you teach something, first of all, you shine. It's not that you're just teaching it. The elders are teaching the youngsters for their sake. No, you're actually shining when you're teaching. When you're teaching and helping somebody and giving to somebody, you're shining. You're shining brightly. You're becoming a better person. But your point is also the elders should teach the younger ones, so the younger ones should shine. Teach things in a way that they understand it, so that they can shine with it. And this teaches us really our responsibility in terms of chinuch, in terms of education. And education is not only parent to teacher, to child, or student to teacher. Education is how we relate to all those around us. How do we educate people? How do we respond to those around us? And we're all in a position of teaching at some time. We have friends who come to us to ask for advice or ask for our opinions on things. We're all in a position of being the teacher, so to speak, to help somebody, to understand somebody, to influence somebody. We're all those influencers to somebody. How should we influence somebody? In a way that is positive for them, in a way that makes them shine. Explain it. A teacher can't just teach the material, but teach the material in a way that you're shining, that you're talking softly and nicely so that the children understand it, and also that they're shining, that you're teaching them things that bring out their greatest ability, that bring out the beauty of who they are, that bring out what their eternal soul, their soul of who they are. In fact, if we look at the word for education, the word is chinuch, which means education. And if we look at the word chinuch, it's the word chen, which means beauty, grace, and vav chaf, which is 26, chaf vav, right? Chen and chaf vav. So we have chen, which means beauty, grace, charm, and chaf vav, which is 26, which is the name of God. The name of God, Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey, the highest, holiest name of God, is numerically equivalent to 26. Yud is 10, Hey is 5, Vav is 6, and Hey is 5, totally 26. So the point of chinuch, the point of education, the whole point, what is education? An educator's job is bring out the chen, bring out the beauty, bring out the charm, expose the godly beauty of the student that you're teaching. Show your child, show your student, show your friend, show whoever it is that you're influencing, show them their godly beauty, show them the beauty that they have inside of them, and show them that God loves them, show them God's grace, show them that God loves them, and they should feel that beauty of God within them. That is really what chinuch is all about, what education is really all about. It's not about teaching all the things that we teach. Yes, that's also true, but it's more than that. The essence of chinuch, the essence of education, is showing somebody who they really are, the essence of who they are. And that essence is the godly spark that's within them, the beautiful godly spark that can never ever be tainted. And perhaps we could suggest that this episode with this son that curses is specifically in this parsha, which is talking about chinuch, which is talking about education, is because he grew up in an environment where he did not have that. I mean, we have Dasan, who was his mother's husband, who we know had no gratitude, how we know had, took the aspect of gratitude and saw the opposite. Here Moshe saved him, and the next day he's ready to kill Moshe and to tattletale on him. We know as well that his mother is this person who was this tattle bearer, this person who would go from one person to the next in an immodest way. And of course, the worst thing is his father was really a rapist who went and oppressed people, who oppressed his mother. So he had these qualities all around him. This is what he was surrounded with. So it's almost like, how could you even expect of him to see things differently? Of course, everyone can see things differently. We can overcome our situation and overcome our circumstances. But the job of, perhaps it's telling all of us and telling the messages. This is specifically in a parsha, in a portion where we have the idea of education, of teaching, how the elders are supposed to teach the youngsters. And perhaps it's showing us an example of what happens when an elder does not teach the child in a positive way. What can actually happen? The negative repercussions of what can happen. And whenever we see the negative repercussions of what can happen, we always know that the converse is even more so true. If this is what negatively can happen, imagine the power of good. Imagine the power of doing something in a positive way. Imagine the power of someone teaching in a positive way. We know this so much, so often. I hear people saying, that they had such a negative childhood experience with teachers and with friends and with this and with that. But one teacher believed in me. And when that one teacher believed in me, that gave me the courage to be who I am. You hear this over and over again. That one teacher. I just read a study where, if a person has one interaction a day that's positive, it changes the whole day. So we know the power of the positive, and perhaps that is why this whole episode is here, to show us this power of the positive. Remember what could happen in a negative way. Remember what could happen in a negative situation. For us, it would mean, when a child is bullied, when a person is bullied, when a person is not accepted in a society, but is thrown away from the society. This is what brings out the worst in us. Whereas when we are inclusive, when we do understand people, when we bring them in, when we try to do chinuch in the best way possible, in the way that we know is the right way of doing it, showing them their chen, showing them who they are, showing them the godly spark within them, the results can be so absolutely amazing. And that's, for us, the lesson from this week's Torah portion and from this episode.
This
Thank
was
you.
so